Tonight, Keir Starmer says he's the heir to Blair after a disastrous double by-election defeat for the Conservatives. The Labour leader says his party's twin triumph in Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire reflects the mood of the country. Where does the Conservative Party go next? We'll speak live to the Conservative peer and former Chief of Staff to Theresa May, Lord Garvin Barwell, who thinks Rishi Sunak is in big trouble. And as Rishi Sunak and his team are out in the Middle East working out how to respond, I've been taking the temperature of Tory MPs as the blame game is well underway tonight. All that and more with Sonia Sodha and James Starkie, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Friday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is a Politics Hub by-election special. Hello, good evening and welcome to our special Friday evening edition of the Politics Hub. Don't read too much into by-elections, that's what we're always told. But here's a question for you. If you shouldn't read too much into by-elections, why did the Prime Minister seemingly change his entire net zero strategy after his unexpected win in ULEZ-hating Uxbridge? So I am going to read into by-elections, particularly when people tell me that I shouldn't. And from Tamworth to Mid Bedfordshire, Rutherglen to Somerton and Frome, voters are sending a message, and Conservative MPs are losing their seats. And I'm going to put my luck on the line here because I think that there is something going on. For my money, pundits are underplaying the likelihood of a Labour majority at the next election. And the reason for that is because they're using the 2019 election as their baseline. Now, a Labour majority would take a historic swing, a swing bigger than Blair, just to scrape over the line. But that's a swing from 2019, and that was not a normal election. It was the Brexit election. And it was also the Corbyn election. When I travelled around the country, which I did a lot of in 2019, his name came up all the time. So, effectively, I think the last general election was almost an anomaly. If it was a dot on a scatter graph, you'd discount it. The Conservatives did better than a party in power for a decade had any right to in 2019. And now we're seeing the correction. So we will see these huge swings in by-elections, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see them at the general election either. On our special by-election show tonight, we'll be discussing the significance of the double defeat and what happens next. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has tonight's first report, a warning that it does contain some flashing images.
And I do hereby declare that Sarah Sienna Edwards is duly elected.
Not one political earthquake, but two. Labour storming Tory strongholds in these record-breaking by-elections. Keir Starmer out early to Mid-Beds, where Labour overturned a near 25,000 Tory majority.
We go forward, thank you so much, an incredible result.
An incredible result. They can barely believe the win. Mid-Beds has been Tory territory for nearly a century, and Keir Starmer must now believe that he is on course for an outright majority in the general election. As for the Tories' total despair, one former cabinet minister telling me this morning, these are the dying days of a corrosive party. Mid-Beds has been Conservative for nearly a century. Tamworth, your swing was bigger than the Blair swing in 1996, 23.9%. Can you believe it? I mean, it must be exceeding your own expectations.
We do accept victories like this humbly because we know that trust and confidence is precious, and we have to earn that trust and confidence across all of the country as we go towards that general election.
You're definitely being a leader that has not shown any giddiness or excitement really over this. Is that because you know that you don't want to throw away the lead? You're worried about complacency, you're worried about thinking it's in the bag. Is that why you're being quite constrained here?
Well, I know how big a task it is to get the Labour Party from where we landed in the last general election to a Labour majority at the next election.
You were described as the heir to Blair. Number one, do you think you're now better than Blair in terms of the performances?
Well, look, Tony Blair won 3 times, produced a landslide victory for the Labour Party and allowed a Labour government to do incredible things for our country. We face different times and we go forward to a different challenge in 2024. But what I do want to do is follow in the footsteps of a leader of our party who took us from opposition into power.
Winning in true blue Tory shires a crucial step on his way. Mid Bed's a seismic victory, but voters here saw it coming.
This year I knew that I wasn't going to vote Conservative after having Nadine Dorries here for all that time.
I think people were sending a message to the Conservatives. I don't think they were happy with everything that's gone on, the personalities perhaps.
When you look back on what the Tories have and haven't done, then I don't know who would really vote for them, really.
The PM on a diplomatic mission in Egypt, quick to blame local issues rather than his own leadership.
Obviously disappointing results. It's important to remember the context. Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and of course there are also local factors at play here. I'm committed to delivering on the priorities of the British people.
But it's this man who the British people seem to be turning to. Starmer enjoying a hero's welcome in Tamworth too. He certainly will. 2 victories putting Labour firmly on the path to power. His smile says it all. Beth Rigby, Sky News in Mid Bedfordshire.
Well, Beth's hot-footed it back to Westminster. She's with us now. It feels like this was a huge boost for Keir Starmer and his strategy. How did you find him when you spoke to him?
Well, he was clearly very pleased, but the thing that actually struck me about him, Sophie, was that he was trying to be constrained about it. So there is no jubilation, there is no sense of job done. You know, he said, I'm pleased. I was like, is that it? He went, OK, I'm very, very pleased. And why is that? I think there's a couple of things. When you look at the growing stack of evidence, he is a leader that can be more confident that he is heading potentially for an outright majority. It could be year out, so much could change. But you've had 4 by-elections in which Labour have got swings of 20 points plus. And these by-election wins are around the country. So you've got Scotland, you've got the Red Wall, you've got East Staffs, you've got the Shires in Bedfordshire. So it's not just the places, it's the patterns of voting as well. But when I said to one of his key advisors, is this 1997? Are you beginning to believe? They said, no, not yet. These results were a reflection, not a prediction. And as another one said to me, it pays to be paranoid. But I have to say, Sophie, it was a surprise, the mid-beds. I think it was on a knife edge yesterday. No one knew which way it would go. You know, there's a lot of complicated voting in it. So I got the call at, 6 a.m, got out of bed, brushed my teeth, off I went. And I did manage to get there in time for his early morning dash. And I did catch up with him. I think we can listen to it.
Let's have a listen.
Very pleased. These are extraordinary results. To have won either of these by-elections would have been extraordinary. To win both of them is historic.
Can you believe it's happening?
Well, I'm very pleased. This is, with those 2 historic results overnight here in these by-elections. In Selby in Yorkshire, we also won by a 20% swing. In Rutherglen, we won by a 20% swing. So I think what we've shown is across the country, where we're able to make our positive case, people are now wanting to turn their back on 13 years of decline and vote for that positive change Labour Party and a story for the future.
Let's just take it in. I mean, Mid Bed's has been Conservative for nearly a century. Tamworth, your swing was bigger than the Blair swing in 1996, 23.9%. Can you believe it? I mean, it must be exceeding your own expectations.
I'm very pleased, and of course...
Only pleased? Come on.
I'm very, very pleased. But, people put their trust and confidence in a changed Labour Party. That is fantastic, and that was a fantastic candidate. But look, we've made a positive case. We've put our case to the country. Those that didn't vote for Labour before have started voting for Labour. That is very positive. But we do accept victories like this humbly, because we know that trust and confidence is precious, and we have to earn that trust and confidence across all of the country as we go towards that general election.
You're definitely being a leader that has not shown any giddiness or excitement really over this. Is that because you know that you don't want to throw away the lead? You're worried about complacency, you're worried about thinking it's in the bag. Is that why you're being quite constrained here?
Well, I know how big a task it is to get the Labour Party from where we landed in the last general election to a Labour majority at the next election. That's a mountain to climb. We are climbing that mountain. We can see the summit with these victories, but we've still got to get there. And so what this gives me is a renewed spring in my step to take the team up a level again and show that we can now win anywhere, and that Tory voters, former Tory voters, are now voting Labour. And I invite others to look at the changed Labour Party, because I think what's happened is people have recognised that we are the future, and that they can turn their backs on a pretty dismal 13 years of the past.
But is it also the case that Tory voters stay in away rather than switching to you, and that makes it a bit risky?
Well, look, I think if you look at these by-election results, Selby in Yorkshire, 20% swing. Rutherglen in Scotland, 20% swing. Here in Mid Bedfordshire, in Tamworth, 20% swing. Across the country. So this argument that it's just Tory voters not turning out doesn't really hold water. Tory voters did turn out, and some of them turned out to vote Labour. That's the real significance, I think, of these victories.
One more thing. You were described as the heir to Blair. Number one, do you think you're now better than Blair in terms of the performances? And number two, George Osborne said losing Mid-Beds would be Armageddon, or represent Armageddon for the Tories. Is he right?
Well, look, Tony Blair won 3 times, produced a landslide victory for the Labour Party, and allowed a Labour government to do incredible things for our country. We face different times, and we go forward to a different challenge in 2024. But what I do want to do is follow in the footsteps of a leader of our party who took us from opposition into power. And that's where these results are so important as a step along that journey.
Tory Armageddon?
Well, that's their own description. They'll have to reflect on why the country has turned its back on 13 years of decline. But I think it's pretty obvious that across the country people have said it's time for change, it's time for a fresh start, and we now want to vote for a changed Labour Party. I thank people who voted for us, and I hope to earn the votes of many more by putting that positive case about the future of our country.
Outright majority on its way, though, for you, huh?
We'll take each day as it comes, each step along that way, earning the votes with a positive case for the country.
You're right, Beth, so constrained, so cautious, but I guess the votes are showing that the strategy is paying off. Rishi Sunak, I guess, is the one under pressure to try and change. Are we expecting to see a change of strategy, do you think, from him?
I mean, it was an awful, awful night for the Conservatives, and I think that the Conservative Party are in despair from the MPs I have spoken to, one saying that, you know, the Tory relaunch as it was at party conference has stalled. There's no move towards the leadership or the cabinet on the doorstep, and there's no sort of sense of improvement or no way that they can see improvement. So then the next question is, do they switch it up? What do they do now? I mean, I think in terms of Sunak's position, the idea that letters of no confidence will go in, MPs say, yeah, some may go in, but the idea of another leadership challenge when they've had 3 prime ministers in just over a year, and he has a huge rump of the Conservative Parliamentary Party that want him to stay. I think in terms of changing strategy, I think we're going to have to see what happens. They've got the Queen's speech coming up. That's when he can lay down a the legislative agenda. They then have the budget in November. But I think at the moment there's a sense now within the Conservative Party that they are heading for defeat. They feel it, and it's more how do you minimise the losses. And I think the thing for me that comes out of this is if you are a Prime Minister that likes being Prime Minister, that goes to the Middle East and you think you can make effective change in the situation in the Hamas-Israel war, you're not going to want to give up the job. So what it says to me tonight is that when we think about when that general election might come, perhaps Mr Sunak is going to now play it very, very long. He doesn't have to call it until, dare I say it, January 2025.
There you go. January 2025.
We could be doing this for a long time, Sophie.
We could. It's going to be a long campaign. Beth, thank you very much indeed. Well, as Beth was saying there, a really difficult night for the Conservatives. We're going to hear now from from Garvin Barwell, now Lord Barwell, of course, who was Theresa May's Chief of Staff after the 2017 election when the party lost its majority and remained her right-hand man until she stood down in 2019. Thank you very much for being on the programme with us. What's your reaction to the by-elections?
They were terrible results. There's no two ways around that. I think before the summer, everybody concentrated on Uxbridge when it was actually clear that there was a local issue there, and that the other two results in Selby and Somerton were much more indicative of the national mood. And these two results last night were identical, really, to the Selby and Somerton results. And they show that the Prime Minister's net zero speech and his conference speech have made no difference to the situation facing the party. I don't imagine all of your viewers will agree with me, but I personally feel a degree of sympathy with him, because I don't think this is really a verdict on him. It's a verdict on what came before him and the damage that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss did to the Conservative brand, which he's struggling to recover from.
As you say, there'll be different people have different ideas about the reasons for it, but the message is pretty clear, as you said, in both the by-elections last night. Do you think it's now all over for Rishi Sunak, or is there any hope of him, winning the election?
There's always an outside chance. I think, Sophie, if you and I look back over the last 6 or 7 years of British politics, if we tried to predict that sequence of events in advance, it would have events would have surprised us several times. But it's extraordinarily difficult to see how he could win from here. I mean, in order to stay as Prime Minister after the next election, he's probably got to win outright, because if we had a hung parliament, the smaller parties would probably support Keir Starmer, not him. So that would require a huge turnaround from the situation we see at the moment. And I think if you cut through all the spin, the opinion polls and these by-election results, a couple of weeks ago, one of the pollsters published a really simple poll, which just said to people, do you think we need a change of government in this country? And 75% of people, including nearly half of the people that voted Conservative last time, said yes. So although it's true that Keir Starmer has not sealed the deal in the way that Tony Blair did in the mid-1990s, there is a very strong desire in this country for change. And you can see that Rishi Sunak understands that, because if you look back at his conference speech, he tried to position himself as that change. But it's just incredibly difficult to do that when you've been in government for 13 years.
Yeah, very hard to be that change candidate. I spoke recently to, I guess you'd call a Conservative grandee, someone who's held one of the 4 great offices of state, and I asked them, is there any chance of Rishi Sunak winning the same question to you? He basically said, no, you're asking the wrong question here. The challenge for Rishi Sunak is to stop the Conservative Party getting so annihilated that we can't rebuild after losing. I mean, is that really where the Conservative Party are at?
I think realistically that's the more likely scenario, absolutely. And whilst it's tough for the Prime Minister or the people advising him, they want to believe they can win. Whoever you spoke to was absolutely right that it makes a huge difference if you're not going to win, maintaining the maximum possible presence in Parliament and ensuring that you can bounce back fairly quickly is really, really important. And actually, if we all put our own biases to one side, it's important for the country that you have a strong opposition in Parliament. So there's lots that he still can do. I think one of the things they'll clearly be hoping is that the economic situation improves over the next 12 months and that they'll get some credit for that. And I think, to be fair, he and Jeremy Hunt do deserve credit for stabilising the situation after the disaster that they inherited from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. But that may not be enough to drag them really back into contention. And if he wants to be the change candidate, then I think one of the things he needs to do is really prove to voters that Truss agenda has gone. It was quite extraordinary watching the Conservative Party conference, seeing her fated as if nothing had happened over the last year, and now talking about publishing an alternative budget alongside Jeremy Hunt's budget. I imagine pretty much every other Conservative MP is desperate for a period of quiet from her to allow the Prime Minister the chance to try and set out his agenda.
It's interesting you're saying there about conference. We had the Liz Truss show, then of course we had the Nigel Farage show, we had the Suella Braverman show. Are you, as someone who I guess is a bit more in the sort of centre of your party, I think it would be fair to say, are you worried about the direction the Conservative Party is going in?
Well, look, I think Rishi himself is a distinct improvement on his 2 predecessors, but there's clearly still people in the government and in the party who are trying to drag it in that direction. If I looked at my Twitter feed, Sophie, it's full of people saying the problem with the Conservative Party is it's not conservative or right-wing enough. Whereas actually, if you look at the polling, it's very, very clear that voters think Sunak and his government are significantly to the right of them. So it's a classic example, and political parties have this problem all the time, that their true believers completely misread what the problem is. And it happened, if you think about when Labour lost in 1979, or when the Conservative lost in 97, or when Labour lost in 2010, on all three of those occasions, the party went off in the wrong direction initially before the voters eventually dragged them back to the centre ground.
Final question for you. You've been, in the back room making these kind of decisions before. Is there going to be a reshuffle next week?
I think he's bound to try and freshen up his team and hope that prime ministers are always looking for something they can do that changes the dynamic, and reshuffles are one of the tools available to him. So if he's trying to communicate to the country that he's the change candidate and this isn't the same kind of Conservative government that they've seen under Liz Truss and under Boris Johnson, then a reshuffle is one of the ways he can try and do that. History tells us they rarely make a big difference, but I think he's almost bound to try it.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Lord Barwell there speaking to us on the programme tonight. Well, we can pick up now with our guest this evening, journalist and broadcaster Sonia Sodha and the former Home Office Special Advisor James Starkie. I'm going to just pull my chair a bit closer to you, a little bit far away. I hope that's OK on the cameras. What a couple of by-elections we've had. I mean, were you surprised, do you think, to see the two losses?
I mean, there were big losses. Was I surprised? I think Tamworth, it actually wasn't much of a surprise. And if you went back to the two previous elections before 19, it was only a majority of about 11 or 12,000. Mid Beds is the biggest one. And I think I went up to Labour conference, and obviously the Rutherglen happened. And I said to people there, I think the thing that would strike fear in the Tory party much more than the big result in Rutherglen, is losing Mid Beds, a 23,000 majority. And I think that's the more seismic one within the Conservative Party.
What do you think, Sonia?
Well, I think there were two absolutely huge by-election wins. If you look at those swings, the last time we saw those sorts of swings from Labour to the Conservative during a parliament was 92 to 97, and look at what happened in the 1997 general election.
We heard Keir Starmer being very cautious there. What about you? Are you as cautious as that, or are you thinking, look, come on, it's happening, we're going to get a majority?
I mean, things can always change in a year, right? And you can conceive of events that might happen over the next year that could really shake up the political scene. And we've seen that happen in the last 5 years. So, for example, if the conflict were to escalate much further, obviously we hope it doesn't between Israel and Gaza, that could potentially shift the political situation. There are other situations you could imagine. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we see something that changes things. But at the moment, it really is going to be an election that is about the economy. It really feels like the country is ripe for a change. It's not just about by-election results, it's about the polls as well. It's about the local election results. And it is hard to see, as Garvin Barwell just said, the Conservatives coming back from this to win a majority.
If you were Rishi Sunak, or advising Rishi Sunak now, what would you be saying to him? What does he need to do to try and change the narrative?
I think they're going to have to be bold. I don't really buy this, his reset has failed, because his reset's only just started. And there's people, Gavin was talking about polling. I think virtually no one pays attention to party conferences ever. So I think...
people like us, obviously.
Apart from people like us. Apart from sensible people.
We're not normal. But...
Exactly. And so I think... He's going to need to be bold. He's got the King's speech, he's got the Autumn Statement, and they're two big things. They are things that, particularly the Autumn Statement, that people pay attention to. And also, we've got the Rwanda decision next month. And that will also have repercussions depending on what the judgment is. And that is a potential wedge issue. So there are things coming up that Rishi can look to build on it. But the challenge, as others have said, is how does he make himself the change candidate? Boris was able to do that. Boris is a unique figure in British politics.
And he had Brexit.
He had Brexit, but also him himself. He is a unique figure. And, managed after May to deliver the big majority. But can Rishi do that? It's a challenge.
Will there be a reshuffle?
Yeah, there'll be a reshuffle, I think, before Christmas.
Really?
But
next week? Maybe.
I think he'll wait a bit longer, but we'll see.
Okay, we'll see. What do you reckon? Reshuffle soon, or?
Yeah, I think so, but I share Gavin Barwell's scepticism that it changes anything. I mean, you change a few people at the top? I don't think it's something that generally really cuts through with the public. So it's quite difficult to see what all he can do is basically hope that these pledges that he's made around the economy and halving inflation and, you know, stopping the small boats, that some of that stuff starts to come off. But the problem is, a lot of it's dependent on factors outside of his control.
Thanks both. We'll have much more from James and Sonia throughout the programme. Still to come on the Politics Hub. When by-election predictions don't quite turn out as planned.
I have no idea about Tamworth because I haven't been to canvass there. I think we can and will win Mid Beds.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Hello, welcome back. Now, if you were watching the Politics Hub on Wednesday night, and what else would you have been doing on Wednesday night, you'd have seen the Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesperson was on. I asked her how she thought her party would get on in last night's by-elections.
I have no idea about Tamworth because I haven't been to canvass there. I think we can and will win Mid Beds.
Annalena Moran joins us now live. Thank you so much for being on the programme. Look, first, I just want to say I get predictions wrong all of the time, and you were showing admirable loyalty to your own party. What went wrong?
So I think I said it even just before that clip. People we knew were taking a long time to make up their minds. And the reason I said what I said was because even on early last week, people who were out door knocking were saying there were huge numbers of undecideds and they hadn't told us which way they were going to go. Now, sometimes that's because they have decided to go somewhere else and they're being polite, or that they genuinely haven't decided. And what we were seeing from the data was a general uptick over the course of the campaign of where we were going. If that trend had continued, we could have won and would have won, which is why I said what I said. Sadly, that isn't what happened, and I'm gutted. I'm gutted for our candidate. I'm gutted for the party. I'm pleased we put our best foot forward, though, and we're proud of the campaign we did run.
Is there a bit of a lesson here for the Liberal Democrats, where you've obviously had some by-election successes against Conservative candidates? If Labour's in play, it feels like you've got less of a chance.
Well, I think at the next election, and pundits have been chewing over this stuff all week. I mean, Mid Beds was an interesting one insofar as if you look at where it is on the target seat list, it's way out there in terms of seats that either Labour or us would be targeting at a normal general election. So there are very few that are going to be three ways. Our firm focus is taking seats off the Tories, particularly in the Blue Wall, which is the southeast, places like Oxfordshire, where I'm from. These are exactly the sorts of places that we are competitive. And what we have shown is, yes, we can come from third. So it was always going to be challenged. We said that right up from the off in that by-election. But the next general election is going to be in seats where we're really competitive, where we're already close seconds, and that we're going to just take it over the top. And that is what's going to get rid of this Conservative government.
It's interesting that you're saying that, look, the Blue Wall is your kind of target here. Is the idea to, I guess, turn back the tide that David Cameron first did after the coalition years, where he took so many seats off the Liberal Democrats?
It's certainly true that a lot of those places are now back in play, and you just have to look at what happened in Somerton and Frome. Massive majority, both overturned and now gained, and that was very recently. So we're back in play in the southwest. We're back in play in places around London, of which Mid Beds is sort of one of them. So again, another reason why we were going for it. But it's seats where we have historic support that we're looking to gain back, and some seats with newer support where we've seen big demographic change, people moving out of urban centres, coupled with rural villages where we're doing well again. And that's the big story, I think, for us from this by-election. I mean, Mid Beds has 48 villages. And in those villages, when we were looking at the votes piling in, I wasn't at the count, but this is what I understand since, actually those villages were voting for us. So we have gained credibility again in those rural communities, combined with, classic seats like mine with universities in them. Certainly, it is us finding that foothold again and moving forwards.
OK, thank you very much, Layla Moran there. Still to come on the Politics Hub. So a fairly stonking by-election swings to Labour, and the party breathlessly claiming it's redrawing the political map. But is it? Just how much do these results tell us about the national picture? We'll be crunching the numbers up next. Hello. Now, Labour are understandably pretty pleased by last night's by-election results, but what do they tell us about the party's prospects at the next election? Well, Sky's political correspondent Ali Fortescue has been digging through the data, and I'm going to be fully transparent here. Not all of the numbers that Ali was hoping to have are going to be appearing on the screen, but she is still going to be taking us through all of the stuff that you've been digging into.
Exactly.
So I guess the question that people are asking is, how much of this can we kind of read across into a general election?
Yeah, and I think two of the kind of big defences from the government today have been, number one, turnout, which, yes, was really low, 44% in Mid Bedfordshire, 36% in Tamworth. That is much lower than we saw in the general election. So they're saying, hold on, those people will be coming out in a general election and voting Conservative. I don't think that necessarily makes up for just how bad it was. The other thing that they're saying is that Keir Starmer isn't coming up on the doorstep. He's not quite cutting through in the same way that Tony Blair did. I think we can play you a attack line from 1996. Oh, no, look, we do have the graphs.
Here we go.
This is very exciting, Sophie.
Excellent, let's do it.
OK, let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this is the first graph I wanted to show you, because this really sums up just how significant this is. Tamworth, number 2, for the biggest by-election swings since the Second World War, just behind Dudley West, which, of course, just before Tony Blair's big landslide. Number 6, Mid Bedfordshire, and you can also see, worth saying, Wakefield in there as well. I think the next one should dig into Tamworth. Here we go. So if you compare 2019 to 2023 last night, you can see just how much the Conservative vote share has collapsed. And the next one should show this pie chart changing.
Wow,
there we go. I mean, this was a pretty safe Conservative seat, getting increasingly Conservative. 19,000 majority last time round, now just 1,300 for the Labour Party. But the next graph is really interesting because this shows you the importance of reform, because they got about the same number as the Labour majority. And if we turn this into a bar chart, the next graph should be able to show us that. There we go. And there you go. Yeah. So they could have won if they'd got those reform votes.
And reform being the kind of right-wing, anti-immigration force. So perhaps that's why you can see Rishi Sunak leaning into some of those arguments there.
Exactly, yeah. Let's have a look at Mid Bedfordshire. We have, I think, the next pie chart. So 2019, sizable Conservative majority. They got more than 40,000 votes back then. And look at that. Now, much less, 13,000 votes. A lot of that, the government will say, as I was saying before, is down to turnout. And I think we can show you some of the figures for turnout next as well. As I say, 44% in Mid Bedfordshire now. Compare that to 73.7% back in 2019. I mean, that is a really big difference. So they're saying basically people stayed at home that would have voted Conservative, but are they going to turn up in a general election? So that is turnout. The other government defence is that this isn't like 1997 because Keir Starmer isn't Tony Blair. I think what we have seen are similar swings to what we saw before 1997. And this, I think, shows the trouble for the government. Obviously, red is where Labour have done well. This is since 2019. And, I mean, you can see the amount of red. Hartlepool seems like a long time ago when the government did pretty well in a by-election then. But I think what's worrying are the dates here, because the more recent dates are the bigger swings.
Yeah, just look at Tamworth, Mid Bedfordshire, the ones that have just happened. It really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? Just how huge those swings were.
Exactly. So, yeah, it does feel pretty different. I'm going to play you now that graph I was trying to play you earlier of something that was said, Conservative attack line in 1996. Have a listen to this.
Well, I think the message that we would give is this, that there is no enthusiasm out there for Mr Blair and his new reconstructed ersatz Labour Party. I mean, it is all false. In their heart of hearts, the voters
But what are you going to say to your Conservative
But
MPs?
I'm saying to their Conservative MPs, that is our opportunity. Let's score some goals. The goal is wide open.
So that is
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, you could really, that could have been from last night. It really could have. No enthusiasm for Mr Blair.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, basically the same attack line being used. Lots of comparisons, as you say, with 1997. We've spoken to Patrick English from YouGov. Here's what he had to say about that.
But in terms of the realities of the leaders, Keir Starmer does not need to be a Tony Blair to win this next election. Boris Johnson in the last election proved that a fairly unpopular leader can beat a very unpopular leader, and a fairly unpopular party can beat a very unpopular party. So it's a different reality, but in terms of the size of what's needed, 1997 is a decent benchmark and some.
Thanks very much, Ali Fortescue there, crunching the figures and also doing a bit of digging into the historical archives as well to put everything into context. Thanks, Ali. So, I'm going to go and sit down. Are we heading for a Labour overall majority? We can speak now to the Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, who joins us from Sheffield. Thank you very much for being with us. So, are we heading to a Labour majority then?
Well, good evening, Sophie. Look, we're all absolutely delighted at yesterday's by-election victories. I'm a pessimist by nature, so I certainly wasn't expecting us to win it, but I don't think many people were expecting us to overturn such significant majorities in Tamworth, which we haven't won since 2005 and has been swinging gradually to the Tories ever since, and certainly not in Mid Bedfordshire, which is a true Tory heartland, and in 2019 the Tories won 60% of the vote, and Nadine Dorries had 20,000 majority. So I think the swing from the Conservatives directly to Labour voters demonstrates the scale of anger in the country with what the Tories have done, both to our public services and to our economy, but also that they're looking up and seeing a Labour Party that is changed from 2019 and from that catastrophic election defeat, and ready to offer voters hope that Britain can be rebuilt and that we can, the politics can change things again for the better.
The thing that lots of Conservatives are effectively clinging on to is that, look, Labour hasn't sealed the deal. Keir Starmer isn't a Tony Blair. And actually, the reason that Labour picked up these seats wasn't because of loads of people switching to Labour. It wasn't because of Labour putting on loads of votes. It was just Conservative voters were staying at home. And they think that they can win those people back in a general election. What would you say to that?
Well, look, I know the Conservatives have got to say something today following those terrible defeats yesterday. I sympathise. I've been in that position where I have to go on the media and defend the party after you've suffered terrible election defeats. But this wasn't about Conservative voters showing apathy. That was the second biggest swing directly from Conservative to Labour since 1945. And I campaigned in those seats. I campaigned in Selby as well just 3 months ago. Those have been catastrophic switches directly to Labour, and I spoke to people who'd voted Conservative their entire lives, and they were furious about the impact that they have directly had on their mortgages. I spoke to one man who showed me his redundancy notice. He worked in the construction industry, and despite the fact he voted Tory his entire life, he directly blamed the current government for the impact that they've had on the economy and on his job. And I've just spoke to so many people who are sick to the back teeth of this government and are ready for change. And as I say, I think they're looking at a Labour Party that is changed, has reflected on itself and changed since that catastrophic defeat in 2019. And I think they think that Rishi Sunak offering himself as the change candidate when they've been in power for 13 years is just beyond ridiculous.
Can I ask you a bit of a bigger picture question? Because I do feel that, when I speak to Labour frontbenchers, there's a lot of discipline. There's a lot of, being very careful, very cautious, not committing to anything, not giving too much away in terms of policy. You're offering two things to the electorate at the minute. You're saying, look, we're going to have an iron grip on the public finances, but you're also saying we can transform public services. I'm struggling, to be completely honest, to see how both of those things can be true. Is it now time to start pitch rolling for what happens if you do win the election? Because you're going to have a very, very difficult economic inheritance. Is it not time to be levelling with the public about what a Labour government would actually look like?
Well, look, I think that's absolutely fair. But the reason why we make clear that we are building everything on the rock of fiscal responsibility is partly because we have a serious credibility gap in the past with people trusting that we are going to be responsible with the nation's finances, but also because people saw directly last year what happens when the government does play fast and loose. It has a direct impact on working people's lives. It has a direct impact on people's mortgages, and it has a direct impact on our ability to spend on public services. So that's why Rachel Reeves has been so disciplined, and the rest of us are so disciplined as well about that, about those facts of fiscal responsibility. But we are setting out a vision of how we will fund public services. And we're not saying that there won't be tough choices. We will be inheriting a very tough economic situation, but that doesn't mean those tough choices don't need to be Labour choices. That's why we've set out plans to abolish the non-dom tax status, to directly invest that into the NHS. It's why we've set out plans to scrap the VAT tax relief on private schools, to directly invest in comprehensive education, in breakfast clubs and mental health schools support for school children. It's why we've set out plans to abolish private equity tax relief as well, in order to fund our public services. But we've also set out really ambitious plans about how we'll grow the economy. Keir was very ambitious, I think, in his conference speech about creating a new generation of new Labour towns, of radically reforming planning so that we can tackle the housing crisis.
You've done so well getting all of these things in. I am going to come in, but, you know, a gold star definitely for the amount of Labour policies you managed to squeeze into the last 30 seconds. Thank you very much indeed, Louise Haigh. Right, let's pick up now, shall we, with Sonia and James. Sonia, do you think Labour are starting to believe?
I do. I mean, you can't have two by-election wins like the ones we saw last night and feel down in the dumps and like things aren't quite going your way. So, but I think one thing I will say about the Labour Party is that they've been in the position before on many occasions where they think they're about to win and it hasn't quite materialised. So that's why you see a certain amount of caution from Labour politicians. The other thing that Labour politicians are really aware of is voters don't like complacent political leaders, and they react against it. So it's why, you know, there is definitely a sense of, yes, this is good, but there's still a long way to go to a general election. You're not going to see anyone being too kind of over the top or victorious yet.
And James, you've done a lot of campaigning, I think it's fair to say, whether it's Vote Leave or whether it's with, you know, Conservative politicians as well. How do you see this kind of long election campaign going? Do you think that Labour are right to feel quite confident at the minute?
They're certainly right to feel confident at the moment. I mean, on the apathy point, I think if you speak to a lot of people in the Conservative Party, they feel their biggest enemy is not Keir Starmer, it's apathy itself.
Interesting.
And this is not actually dissimilar from 92-97. So between 92 and 97, 2 million Conservative voters simply stayed at home. And that was one of the things that helped Blair get such a large landslide, which is, it's both an encouragement, because if you can get those people to turn out, that is the only hope for the Conservative Party, is to get those people to vote, and then they could potentially squeeze through. They're not going to win new votes. And I think on the switching point, you can see in Tamworth, actually, as you pointed out, as Ali pointed out, if you look at the reform vote, which they do expect to swing back to the Conservative Party when they're faced with a potential Keir Starmer leadership, you know, him being PM. So there's hope there. But then you go back to the 92 point. I mean, the fact is they do, you know, in 2019, people felt a reason to go out and vote. They wanted to stop Corbyn. Keir Starmer, he might be many things. He's not scary to even Tory voters, and that's the same as Blair in '97, and that is the challenge, and that's the difficulty.
Really interesting.
And the thing is that it's always part of governments losing elections when their voters stay at home.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Turnout can impact it too. We'll have more from you in a moment, but I do just want to take you to the Middle East, because we have an update to bring you on the 2 American hostages that will be released by Hamas. Our Middle East correspondent Ali Bunkle joins us now. Ali, what can you tell us?
Well, the Prime Minister's office here in Israel has now confirmed the names of the 2 hostages that we understand are being or have been released tonight. They are Judith and her daughter Natalie Ra'nan. They were taken by Hamas on that first day of attacks on the 7th of October from the kibbutz Nahal Oz, which is very, very close to the Gazan border. We believe they might have been visiting friends or relatives there. They are American. This is the result of Qatari mediations, which the Americans have also played a large part in. And the latest news we had is that they were with or in the care of the International Committee for the Red Cross, but we're awaiting a briefing from the Israeli Defense Forces, which is overdue now, so it could happen any moment now. And I think there might be a US State Department briefing in the coming hours as well. This is in 2 weeks of really dreadful news on both sides of the border in terms of civilian lives lost and the utter atrocities that were committed in the kibbutz and towns and villages along the Gaza border 2 weeks ago. This is some small good news. put it in some context, under the latest figures, 203 hostages were taken. So there are many, many more still being held hostage in Gaza tonight. But it would seem to indicate either that Hamas are willing to compromise and show some sort of compassion for women and children and the elderly, and of course everybody who has people and loved ones being held hostage at the moment will hope that some further progress might be made. But I wouldn't necessarily discount cynically that Hamas might be using the hostages and a slow release of them to slow down any potential Israeli ground invasion as well.
OK, Ali, thank you very much indeed. We'll, of course, keep you across all of the updates from the Middle East this evening too. Still to come on the Politics Hub this evening. Well, the by-election results are in and the recriminations have begun. We'll take a look at what or who is getting blamed for last night's Conservative defeats at the ballot box. That is next.
Well, what I concentrated on in this film is the experiences of people trying to live a normal life in a situation where there was intense sectarian violence, and when you go out the door in the morning, you never know whether you come back alive or not. And I had a lot of questions about how do people live in a situation like this? What do they do to try to live a normal life? What do they tell their children? How do they renew a fragile sense of hope every morning to get themselves out of bed and out the door to do what they need to do? I decided it had to be a collective story because that situation is lived in a collective way. You're always aware of other people's lives as a context to your own life. So yes, it is. It's an ensemble film of intersecting stories that play out over the last week of 2006, which was at the height of the sectarian violence. And so you keep moving from one story to the other. And in the end, it is a collective story. There's a way in which fiction can somehow get further underneath, deeper into the characters than documentary does. And especially the kind of documentaries I make are always about people, but they are observational. So you're standing outside of it. And I think with fiction, you can actually delve a bit deeper into the characters. And so I had a go. People who are living through a war or in war zones are often depicted as just victims. And it's a kind of abstraction, which means that people can't really relate to them because they're living in a situation.
I'm going to take you to the Middle East because the Israeli Defense Force spokesperson Daniel Hagari is speaking at a briefing. It's after the news that 2 American hostages will be released by Hamas. Let's listen.
The establishment, as well as the IDF, will continue to do everything they can in order to bring back those who are missing and to bring back the hostage, to find those who are missing and to bring back the hostages home. Hamas is currently trying to show himself to the world as if they had returned these hostages for humanitarian reasons. But this is a murderous terrorist organization that is still holding on to babies, children, women, elderly who were abducted into the Gaza Strip, and they're continuing to commit war crimes against all of humanity. In the north of Israel, over the past 24 hours, we killed a terrorist that fired at IDF soldiers near the town, near the community of Margaliot, and 4 others who tried to shoot at Israelis and security forces. In Gaza, we are continuing to our attacks and assaults all the time. We are targeting all those who participated in the planning of the horrendous events of Saturday, October 7th. We killed the person in Hamas who is in charge of developing their means of warfare. We will continue to target members of this organization wherever they're at, and we are gearing for the next stages of this war. The war will continue for many more weeks, and we have some difficult challenges and difficult times ahead of us. Currently, hundreds and thousands of reservists, as well as IDF soldiers and members of the Israeli security establishment are at work. They come from all parts of Israeli society. They are all together for the state of Israel. Any questions, please? Sir, are there any contacts for the release of other hostages? Does it have to do with the issue of humanitarian aid that is supposed to enter the Gaza Strip, for example, humanitarian aid in exchange for the release of some of the women hostages? We are currently in an effort. It is a top priority for Israel to bring back the hostages and to locate and find all those who are MIAs. The effort is on the intel level, on the civilian level, the military levels. We are exhausting every option. And along with that, we're continuing our warfare against Hamas, and we are preparing for the next stage in this war. As we're speaking, the crossing points are closed. No equipment is currently entering the Gaza Strip, and I am going to inform everyone once the IDF and the Israeli government decide otherwise. When you're talking about the efforts regarding the release of all hostages, are you also referring to Israeli hostages who have been held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip for several years? Your question regarding the Israeli civilians and the Shaul family and Golden family who have been in Gaza even since before this current event, and the answer is yes, all those who were abducted. Any more questions? So good evening then, and Shabbat Shalom.
So you see there, that was the latest update from the Israeli Defense Forces on the release of those two hostages. We'll have much more on the situation in the Middle East after this short break. Thank you for watching the Politics Hub this evening. We'll be back next Monday. Sarah J. Mee is up next.